Okay guys, moving on to chapter 11, I will warn you, and this is a little bit of a longer chapter, so kind of bear with me as we go through these slides. There are a lot more of them than there typically are, but planning the merchandise allocation within your stores and such is a super important topic in retailing. So do your very best to kind of stay engaged. I'll do my very best to not be completely boring when I'm talking to you, and hopefully we'll just get through these slides together. So merchandise management is basically just the process by which a retailer attempts to offer the right quantity of the right merchandise in the right place at the right time. Pretty much the goal of retailing in general. The underlying goal is to meet the company's financial bottom line. So buyers at the retailing firm need to be in touch with and anticipate what customers are going to want to buy. But this ability to sense market trends is pretty tricky as far as just trying to forecast what your customers might be thinking about buying, because as customers we are not always behaving rationally. So what might appear to be an obvious purchase behavior may very well not be. So it's really important that that buyers kind of try to do their very best to stay in tune with managing market trends and stocking merchandise effectively. Even more important than that skill is probably the ability to analyze sales data and make appropriate adjustments in prices as well as inventory levels. So merchandise planning requires a lot of math. Every retailer has its own system for grouping categories of merchandise, but the basic structure of the buying organization is pretty similar for most retailers. The highest classification level is the merchandise group. Each merchandise group is managed by a general merchandise manager, or a GMM, who is often a senior VP or pretty high level officer within the firm. Each of the GMMs is responsible for several different departments. The second level in the merchandise classification scheme is the department. So departments are generally managed by division merchandise managers. And the third level in merchandise classification is the classification. A classification is a group of items that are targeting the same customer type. Categories are the lowest level in the classification scheme. Each buyer manages several merchandise categories. The stock keeping unit is kind of like the most important tool that a merchandising manager can use. It is the smallest unit available. It represents one specific item. So like your barcode, your SKU that gets scanned when you purchase something, that is the smallest unit that is managed by an inventory management system. It generally indicates the brand, the size, the color, and the style of whatever item you're purchasing. So this is just a graphical representation of how the organization might oversee the different levels of inventory management. So again, we've got the merchandise group, the department, the classification, category, and SKUs. The merchandise category is the basic unit of analysis for making merchandising management decisions. A merchandise category is an assortment of items, again, that customers see as substitutes for another. A category management approach to managing merchandise assigns one buyer or category manager to oversee all merchandising activities for an entire category. Managing by category can help to ensure that the store's assortment includes the best combination of sizes and vendors, or the combination that will get the most profit from the allocated space. Whereas department stores in general manage merchandise at the category level, supermarkets and other general merchandise retailers traditionally have organized their merchandise around brands or vendors. Managing merchandise within a brand category can lead to inefficiencies, though, because it fails to consider the interdependencies among SKUs in that category. Some retailers turn to one favored vendor in an effort to help them manage a particular category. So this vendor is known as the category captain, and it is a supplier who works with the retailer to develop a better understanding of consumer shopping behaviors, and creates assortments that satisfy consumer needs and improves the profitability of the merchandise category. Selecting vendors as category captains has several advantages for the retailers. First, it makes the merchandise management tasks easier and can increase profits. Vendors are often in a better position to manage a category than retailers are because they have superior information about the specific category. A potential problem with establishing the category captain is that vendors could take advantage of their position in that role. Additionally, there are some antitrust considerations associated with category captains. For instance, a vendor's category captain could collude with the retailer to fix prices or block other brands, particularly smaller brands, from gaining access to valuable market space. So this is just a graphical representation of your average grocery store, which has a chilled drink department and a variety of different categories of products available. Okay. So now we're going to get into a little bit of math here when it comes to evaluating merchandise management performance. A really good measure for evaluating a retail firm is return on assets, or ROA. Return on assets is composed of two components. It is composed of asset turnover and your net profit margin. However, ROA is not a good measure for evaluating the performance of merchandise managers because they don't have control over all of the retailer's assets or all of the expenses that a retailer incurs, like operating expenses, like human resources, real estate, logistics, information systems. Merchandise managers don't have any control over that. So they could actually be doing very well managing inventory, but if the retailer itself is spending too much on overhead and things like that, it's going to reflect poorly on the merchandise manager if you're using ROA to calculate success. So merchandise managers only have control of the merchandise they buy, the cost of that merchandise, the price at which it's sold, and that represents or results in a gross margin. So a financial ratio that assesses a buyer's contribution to the ROA is gross margin return on inventory investment. So that's GMROI, gross margin return on inventory investment. GMROI measures how many gross margin dollars are earned on every dollar of inventory investment. So it looks at how much money you're paying out to purchase inventory and how much money is earned as a ratio to how much you're spending. GMROI is a similar concept to return on assets, but its components are all under control of the buyer rather than other managers. So again, GMROI is the gross margin percentage times the sales to stock ratio, and that calculation is right here. Average inventory in GMROI is measured at cost because a retailer's investment in inventory is the cost of the inventory, not its retail value. So we all know that when we go to purchase something at a store, we're paying some sort of markup on top of what the retailer paid to acquire that inventory. So you're doing this calculation with at-cost inventory. GMROI combines the effects of both profits and turnover. It's important to use a combined measure so that departments with different margin to turnover profiles can be compared and evaluated. GMROI is used as a return on investment profitability measure to evaluate departments, merchandise classifications, vendor lines, and items. It's also useful for managers in evaluating buyers' performance since it can be related to the retailer's overall return on investment. So this is just a illustration of the GMROI calculation as it relates to a fresh bakery bread and also to gourmet canned food. So you guys can work through these calculations if you want to. I figured I would just leave this for you so that you could see the calculation in an applied way. So retailers normally express inventory turnover or sales to stock ratios on an annual basis rather than part of the year. If the sales to stock ratio for a 3-month season equals 2.3, the annual sales to stock ratio will be reported as 4 times that number, or 9.2. The most accurate measure of average inventory is to measure the inventory level at the end of each day and divide the sum by 365. Most retailers can use their information systems to get accurate average inventory estimates by collecting and averaging the inventory in the stores and distribution centers at the end of each day. Another method is to take end of the month inventories for several months and then divide by that number of months. So lots of different ways to keep track of your inventory, but as you can imagine, doing it on a daily basis is going to give you a more accurate number. So the bakery department in a supermarket typically has a high sales to stock ratio and a low gross margin. So there's a lot of turnover in inventory here because it's a fresh baked good. So that's going to give you a high sales to stock ratio. And again, this is just an example of kind of estimating turnover by month. So if you were to estimate turnover for a quarter, January, February, March, 3 months, you would look at your end of the month inventory, add it up, and then divide by 3 and get your average monthly inventory. There are 2 ways that buyers can increase GMROI. They can either improve their turnover, their inventory turnover or their sales to stock ratio, or they can increase their gross margin. To improve the inventory turnover, buyers can either reduce the level of inventory or increase sales. One approach that buyers can take is to increase inventory turnover is to reduce the number of SKUs within a category. However, reducing the number of SKUs could reduce sales because customers will be more likely or less likely to find what they're actually looking for. A second approach for reducing the level of inventory is to keep the same number of SKUs but reduce the backup stock for SKUs. But that would mean that items run the risk of going out of stock more quickly. Excuse me. A third approach for increasing inventory turnover is to buy merchandise more often but in smaller quantities, which reduces average inventory without reducing sales. But buying smaller quantities can decrease the gross margin. A fourth approach is to increase sales but don't increase inventory proportionally. However, while inventory turnover would increase in this situation, gross margin would also decrease, which could have a negative impact on GMROI. So as you can see, there's a lot of different ways that you can improve inventory turnover. Increasing inventory turnover can have positive impacts on sales by attracting more customer visits, improving sales associate morale, and providing more resources to take advantage of the new buying opportunities. When inventory turnover is low, the merchandise begins to look shop-worn or slightly damaged from being displayed and handled by customers for a long time. Finally, when inventory turnover increases, more money is available to buy new merchandise. Having money available to buy merchandise late in fashion season can also open up more profit opportunities, and we'll get into more about fashion merchandising in a couple of slides. There are 3 approaches to increasing the gross margins. Those are increasing prices, reducing the cost of goods sold, or reducing customer discounts. Increasing prices obviously increases your gross margin, but it can also decrease sales because people don't want to pay more than they're used to paying. And inventory turnover can also decrease because price-sensitive customers might buy less. Buyers usually attempt to lower the cost of goods sold by negotiating for better prices from the vendor or increasing merchandise assortments in private labels. Buyers can increase gross margins by reducing the customer discounts needed to sell unwanted merchandise or merchandise left over at the end of the season. So for instance, instead of giving 15% off, they might give 10% off, and then they make a little bit more money. So lots of tiny little tweaks can be made to, over time, really impact your GMROI. So when you're moving through the merchandise planning process, first buyers need to forecast category sales, develop an assortment plan for merchandise in that category, and determine the amount of inventory needed to support the forecasted sales and the assortment plan. Second, buyers need to develop a plan outlining the sales expected for each month, the inventory needed to support these sales, and the money that can be spent on replenishing sold merchandise and buying new merchandise. Along with that plan, buyers and planners also need to decide what type and how much merchandise should be allocated to each store. Third, having developed this plan, the buyer negotiates with vendors and buys the merchandise. Buyers continually monitor the sales of merchandise in the category and make adjustments. These decisions are not necessarily made sequentially. Some decisions might be made at the same time or in a different order than what I just described to you. Retailers use different types of merchandise planning systems for managing staple items and also fashion merchandise categories. Staple merchandise categories, or also called basic merchandise categories, consist of items that are in continuous demand over an extended time period, like paper towels or toilet paper. I use toilet paper as an example a lot. I don't really know why. While consumer packaged goods companies introduce many new products each year, the number of new-to-the-world product introductions each year in staple categories is limited. So what they mean by that is, again, using toilet paper as an example, there might be a lot of new toilet papers available, so like extra soft toilet paper with pictures on it, I don't know, biodegradable, blah blah blah. So lots of new products, but the product of toilet paper is not new to the world. We have toilet paper. So when it comes to CPGs or consumer packaged goods, new to the world products are very limited. Because sales of staple merchandise are fairly steady from week to week, people buy toilet paper pretty regularly, it's relatively easy to forecast demand, and the consequences of making mistakes in forecasting are not great. Merchandise planning systems for staple categories focus on continuous replenishment. Fashion merchandise categories consist of items that are only in demand for a relatively short period of time. New products are continually introduced into these categories, making the existing products obsolete. Forecasting the sales for fashion merchandise categories is much more challenging than for staple merchandise categories, because buyers for fashion merchandise categories have a lot less flexibility in correcting their errors. Due to the short selling season for most fashion merchandise, buyers often do not have a chance to reorder additional merchandise after an initial order is placed. An important objective of merchandise planning systems for fashion merchandise categories is to be as close to out of stock as possible at the same time that the SKUs move out of fashion. So basically, there's a pretty quick turnover in different types of fashion merchandise. You want to sell everything that you have and not have to, number one, reorder or not run out too soon by the time those items go out of stock or out of kind of trend. So, for instance, if you are a store selling bathing suits, you want to buy only the amount of bathing suits that you need to sell every single one of them by the end of bathing suit season. You don't want to carry them over to the winter time, and you don't want to run out of bathing suits in early July. So it's really tricky, and it's kind of tough to forecast those types of purchases, and it's really hard to correct error because, again, you don't want to have to reorder. Seasonal merchandise categories consist of items whose sales fluctuate dramatically depending on the time of the year. Both staple and fashion merchandise can be seasonal, like swimwear or snow shovels, but retailers buy seasonal merchandise in much the same way that they buy fashion merchandise. The sales of staple merchandise are relatively constant from year to year, so forecasts are typically based on extrapolating historical sales. Then statistical techniques can be used to forecast future sales. Controllable factors include the opening and closing of stores, the price set for merchandise in the category, special promotions for the category, the pricing and promotion of complementary categories, and the placement of merchandise categories in the store. Some factors that are beyond the retailer's control when it comes to forecasting are the weather, general economic conditions, special promotions or new product introductions by vendors, and new product pricing and promotional activities by competitors. Forecasting sales for fashion merchandise is challenging though, because some or all of the items in the category are new and different than units offered in previous years. Some sources of information that retailers use to develop forecasts for fashion merchandise categories are 1. Previous sales data, 2. Market research, 3. Fashion trend services, and 4. Vendors. Although some items in fashion merchandise categories might be new each season, many items in a fashion category are often similar to items sold in previous years. So accurate forecasts might be generated by simply projecting past sales of not exactly the same item, but sweater A versus sweater B. So you can use this sales from sweater A to predict future sales from sweater B, if that makes sense. Information on how customers will react to new merchandise can be obtained by asking customers about the merchandise and measuring customer reactions to new merchandise through the sales tests. Another excellent source of customer information is social media sites. Buyers learn a lot about their customers' likes, dislikes, and preferences by monitoring their past purchases and by monitoring their interactions with social networks like Facebook, Pinterest, and Twitter. I would add Instagram in there too. I feel like that's kind of more popular for different types of retailers these days. Customer information can be collected through traditional forms of marketing research like in-depth interviews and focus groups. The in-depth interview is an unstructured personal interview in which the interviewer uses extensive probing to get individual respondents to talk in detail about a subject. A more informal method of interviewing customers is to require that buyers spend some time on the selling floor waiting on customers. A focus group is a small group of respondents interviewed by a moderator using a loosely structured format. Finally, many retailers have a program for conducting merchandise sales experiments. There are many services that buyers, especially buyers of apparel categories, can subscribe to that forecast the latest fashions, colors, and styles. Vendors also have proprietary information about their marketing plans, such as new product launches and special promotions that can have a significant impact on retail sales for their products in the entire merchandise category. Due to the perishable nature of services, service retailers face a more extreme problem than fashion retailers. Their offering perishes at the end of the day, not at the end of the season. Some service retailers attempt to match supply and demand by taking reservations or making appointments. Another approach is to sell advance tickets for a service. After forecasting sales for the category, the next step in the merchandise management planning process is to develop an assortment plan. An assortment plan is the set of SKUs that a retailer will offer in a merchandise category. The assortment plan reflects the breadth and depth of the merchandise that the retailer plans to offer within that merchandise category. Variety is the number of different merchandising subcategories offered within a store or department. Stores with a large variety are said to have good breadth. Some stores carry a large variety of categories while others carry a more limited number. Assortment is the number of SKUs within a subcategory. Stores with large assortments are said to have good depth. So this is just an example of an assortment plan for girls' jeans. So you've got all of the price levels. The style is skinny jeans. You've got some different fabric compositions. So distressed, rinsed, washed, distressed, rinsed, washed, distressed, and rinsed, washed. But you've got different colors as well. So this is just kind of showing the different options or assortment plans that buyers can look at when they're looking at managing their inventory. Here's another example for bootcut jeans. So the process of determining the variety and assortment for a category is called editing the assortment. When editing the assortment for a category, the buyer considers all of the following factors: the firm's retail strategy, the effective assortments on GM ROI, the complementaries among categories, the effects of assortments on buying behavior, and the physical characteristics of the store. The number of SKUs offered within a merchandise category is a strategic decision. The breadth and depth of the assortment in a merchandise category can affect the retailer's brand image as well. So retailers might increase their assortment in categories that are closely associated with their image, All of that is related to retail strategy. Buyers need to be sensitive to the trade-off of increasing sales by offering greater breadth and depth, but at the same time potentially reducing inventory turnover and GMROI. Increasing assortment breadth and depth also can decrease gross margin. For example, the more SKUs offered, the greater the chance of breaking sizes, or that is, the stocking out of a specific size or color SKU. If a stock out occurs of a popular SKU in a fashion merchandise category and the buyer can't reorder during the season, the buyer will typically discount the entire merchandise type, and that will eventually or inevitably reduce gross margin. So Costco is an example of a store that offers limited assortment at low prices, which increases its inventory turnover and lowers its cost. When buyers develop assortment plans, they need to consider the degree to which categories in a department complement one another. Offering large assortments provides several benefits to the customers, including increasing the number of options that they can choose from, providing more informative and more stimulating shopping experience, and offering more variety. However, offering a large assortment can make the purchase decision more complex and time-consuming, and it also could potentially overwhelm your customers, which could reduce sales. So you want to find a balance somewhere in between offering enough variety to keep your customers interested and happy, and give them enough options, but not so much variety that they walk into your store and they're like, whoa, I don't even know where to start, I don't know where to look, I don't know what to buy, I'm not going to buy anything. See ya. So many retailers have initiated SKU rationalization programs in their efforts to analyze the benefits that they might gain from deleting, adding, or keeping certain items within their assortments. Buyers also need to consider how much space to devote to a category. More space is needed to display categories with large assortments. Multi-channel retailers address space limitations in stores by offering a greater assortment through their internet and catalog channels than they do in stores. I'm sure you guys have noticed that from time to time, that if you go into a store that also has an online presence, there are generally a lot more choices online with regard to size, color, etc. Because online, all you have to do is click those little buttons that show you the different colors, and it'll swap the picture out or whatever. But in the store, they actually don't have every single color in every single size, because it doesn't require as much space when you do it online. The model stock plan is the number of each SKU in the assortment plan that the buyer has available for purchase in each store. This is just an example, again, of model stock plans for girls' jeans. So there are 429 units being sold. There are different lengths, so short, medium, and long, and then these are the different stores. So you'll see kind of how this buyer has chosen to divide up the assortment between stores 1 through 14 as far as short, medium, and long lengths are concerned. The number of units of backup stock or buffer stock or safety stock in the model stock plan determines product availability. Product availability is defined as the percentage of the demand for a particular SKU that is satisfied. Product availability is also referred to as the level of support or service level. More backup stock is needed in the model stock plan if a retailer wants to increase product availability. So you need more backup stock if you want to be able to tell your buyers, we are always going to have something available for you. It doesn't matter when you come in, your size will be in the back. So if they want to increase the probability that customers will find the product they want when they visit the store, they'll need to have more backup stock. The trade-off among variety, assortment, and product availability is a crucial issue in determining the retailer's merchandising strategy. Retailers often classify merchandising categories or individual SKUs as A, B, or C items, reflecting the item's availability when the retailer wants to offer. For A items, the retailer rarely wants to stock out, so they'll keep more in the back stock. Lower availability is acceptable for C items, so they won't keep as much in the back stock. Other factors to consider are fluctuations in demand, the lead time for delivery from the vendor, fluctuations in vendor lead time, and the frequency of store deliveries. So this is just a graph that shows kind of inventory investment and product availability. So if you want to have your products available 100% of the time, you generally need to make a very high investment in your inventory. So we're talking like $600 million. If your product is only going to be available about 80% of the time, so 8 out of 10 times a person walks into your store, the product will be available, which means 2 times out of 10 they walk into the store, it won't. You only really need to invest about $100 million. So there's just this kind of curved graph that shows that you have to invest more in order to have your products available more. Okay. The next step in the merchandise planning or the merchandise management process is to establish a control system for how the orders, deliveries, inventory levels, and merchandise sales will evolve over time. The objective of this control system is to manage the flow of merchandise into the stores so that the amount of inventory in a category is minimized, but the merchandise will still be available when the customers want to buy it. The SKUs in a staple merchandise category are sold month after month, year after year. An automated continuous replenishment control system is used to manage the flow of staple merchandise SKUs in categories. The continuous replenishment system monitors the inventory level of each SKU in a store and automatically triggers the reorder of that SKU when inventory falls below a predetermined level. Staple merchandise buying systems are used for merchandise that follow a predictable order receipt order cycle. Most merchandise fits this criterion. Staple merchandise planning systems manage inventory at the level of the SKU. Inventory that goes up and down due to the replenishment process is called cycle stock or base stock. The retailer hopes to reduce the base stock inventory to keep its inventory investment low. Backup stock is the level of inventory needed to ensure merchandise is available in light of these uncertainties. Several factors determine the level of backup stock needed for an SKU. First, the product availability that the retailer wants to provide. Second, fluctuation in demand. Greater fluctuation requires more backup stock. Third, the lead time or the amount of time between recognition that an order needs to be placed and the point at which the merchandise arrives in the store and is ready for sale. And that lead time would come from the vendor. And fourth, fluctuations in lead time. Retailers using collaborative supply chain management systems typically require their vendors to deliver within a very narrow window to reduce fluctuations in lead time. And fifth, the vendor's fill rate, or the percentage of SKUs received complete on a particular order. So Lowe's actually carries more backup stock of popular white paint than it does traditional or specialty colors like melon. So more people generally use white paint, so they carry that more, or they keep more of that in backup stock. It's really not likely that they're going to run out of melon paint, so they don't typically carry that in backup stock. Once the buyer sets the desired product availability and determines the variation in demand and the vendor's lead time and the fill rate, the continuous replenishment systems for staple SKUs can operate automatically. Retailers' information systems determine the inventory level at each point in time, or the perpetual inventory, by comparing the sales made through the POS terminals with the shipments received by the store. However, it is really difficult to achieve a fully automated continuous replenishment of staple merchandise because errors occur sometimes in determining the actual inventory due to shoplifting or an incorrect number of units being input into the information system. So if somebody puts in 10 items instead of 100 items, or 100 items instead of 10 items, so that would obviously cause issues in automatic reordering. So say somebody put in that there were 100 items available, but there's really only 10 items available, that wouldn't trigger the reorder the way it's supposed to. The inventory management report provides information about the inventory management for a staple category. The report indicates decision variables that are set by the buyer, like product availability, the backup stock needed to provide the product availability, the order points and the quantities, plus performance measures such as planned and actual inventory turnover, the current sales rate or velocity, sales forecasts, inventory availability, and the amount on an order. The combination of having a pre-specified schedule based on the trade-off between inventory carrying and ordering costs and the flexibility to demand functions helps to ensure a profitable ordering strategy. The order point is the amount of inventory below which the quantity available should not go, or the item will be out of stock before the next shipment arrives. This number tells the buyer when the inventory level drops to this point and indicates that additional merchandise should be ordered. When inventory reaches the order point, the buyer or system needs to order enough units to ensure product availability before the next time that the order arrives. So again, we've got a lot of graphs and pictures and graphics in this chapter, but this is kind of showing an example of an inventory management report for Rubbermaid SKUs. The control systems for managing fashion merchandise categories are the Merchandise Budget Plan and the Open to Buy. The Merchandise Budget Plan specifies the amount of merchandise in dollars, not units, that needs to be delivered during each month based on the sales forecast. The plan discounts to the employees and the customers and the level of inventory needed to support the sales and achieve the desired GMROI objectives. Inventory turnover, GMROI, and the sales forecast are used for both planning and control. Then merchandise budgets are developed to meet these goals. After the selling season, the buyer must determine how well the category actually performed compared with the plan. So again, an example of a 6-month budget plan for men's casual pants. The Open to Buy system starts after the merchandise is purchased using the Merchandise Budget Plan or Staple Merchandise Management System. The Open to Buy system keeps track of the actual merchandise flows while they are occurring. Specifically, the Open to Buy system records how much is spent each month and therefore how much is left to spend. Differences between actual and planned levels may arise because an order was shipped late or sales deviated from the forecast. Open to Buy is similar to keeping track of the checks that you write in a checkbook. Buyers need to keep track of the merchandise that they purchase and when it's going to be delivered so that they don't buy more or less than they have money to buy with the budget that they have for each month. After developing a plan for managing merchandise inventory in a category, the next step in the merchandise management process is to allocate the merchandise purchased and received to the retailer stores. Research pretty much indicates that the allocation decisions have a much bigger impact on profitability than the decisions about the quantity of merchandise to purchase make. So basically, it's more important that you get the allocation to stores right than it is that you even get the order quantity correct. Allocating merchandise to stores involves 3 decisions: how much merchandise to allocate to each store, what type of merchandise to allocate, and when to allocate the merchandise to different stores. Retail chains typically classify each of their stores on the basis of annual sales. So A stores would have the largest sales volume and typically receive the most inventory, while C stores would have the lowest sales volume and receive the least inventory for a category. In addition to the store sales level, when making allocation decisions for a category, allocators consider the physical characteristics of the merchandise and the depth of assortment and level of product availability that the firm wants to portray for the specific store. In addition to classifying stores on the basis of their size and sales volume, retailers classify stores according to the characteristics of the store's trading area. Store trade area geodemographics are used to develop merchandise assortments for specific stores. Differences in the timing of category purchases across stores also need to be considered. Buyers need to recognize regional differences and arrange for merchandise to be shipped to the appropriate regions when the customers are ready to buy in order to increase inventory turnover in that particular category. Retailers also need to consider the paycheck cycle when making merchandise allocation and promotion decisions, particularly in difficult economic times. Cash-strapped consumers tend to make their largest purchases when they get their paychecks at the beginning of the month, but cut back on purchases as that money runs out toward the end of the month. So this is just a graphic that shows apparel size differences for the average and specific stores in a chain. So this shows the chain's average, and this shows specific store X. This is a graphic that shows the sales of capri pants by region. So when you're in the Midwest, in July and August, your sales of capri pants go up. In the West, they go up around September, October, and November. Or they go up around September, October, and start to decrease into November. The next step in the merchandise planning process is to analyze the performance of the process and make adjustments as necessary. 3 types of analysis related to the monitoring and adjustment step are sell-through analysis, ABC analysis of assortments, and multi-attribute analysis of vendors. The first analysis provides an ongoing evaluation of the merchandise management plan compared with actual sales. The remaining 2 analyses offer approaches for evaluating and altering the assortment plan using specific SKUs in the plan and the vendors that provide the merchandise to support the plan. A sell-through analysis is the comparison between an actual and planned sales plan, between actual sales and a planned sales plan to determine whether price reductions or markdowns are required or whether more merchandise is needed to satisfy demand. The decision depends on experience with the merchandise in the past, whether the merchandise is scheduled to be featured in advertising, whether the vendor can reduce the buyer's risk by providing markdown money, and other merchandising issues. Again, some more graphics, but just an example of the sell-through analysis. ABC analysis identifies the performance of individual SKUs within the overall assortment plan. It's used to determine what SKUs should be in the plan and how much backup stock and resulting product availability are provided for each SKU in the plan. ABC uses the general 80-20 principle that applies that approximately 80% of the retailer's sales or profits comes from 20% of the products. The first step in the ABC analysis is to rank order SKUs using 1 or more performance measures. Measures commonly used in ABC analyses are the sales dollars, sales in units, gross margin, and GMROI. The next step is to classify the items. Then, on the basis of the classification, determine whether to maintain the item in the assortment plan, and if so, what level of product availability to offer. An item's discount or an A items account for 5% of items and represent 70% of sales. These items should never be out of stock. B items represent 10% of the SKUs and an additional 20% of sales. The store should pay close attention to the B items, but it may run out of some SKUs in the B category since it's not carrying the same amount of backup stock as it is for A items. C items account for 65% of SKUs but contribute to only 10% of sales. There are also D items, the remaining 20% of SKUs. These items have virtually no sales until they are marked down. Not only are these items excess merchandise and an unproductive investment, but they also distract from the rest of the inventory and clutter the store shelves. The buyer decides to eliminate most of these items from the assortment plan. The multi-attribute analysis method for evaluating vendors uses a weighted average score for each vendor. A buyer can therefore evaluate vendors by using 5 steps. First, by developing a list of issues to consider in the decision. A balance should be made between too short or too comprehensive list of issues. Second, important weights for each issue should be determined by the buyer or planner in conjunction with the merchandise manager. A scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the least important and 10 being the most important, can be used to evaluate the issues. Third, the buyers need to make judgments about each individual brand's performance on each issue. Fourth, combine the importance and performance scores by multiplying the importance for each issue by the performance for each brand or its vendor. And fifth, determine the vendor's overall rating by summing the product for each brand for all issues to compute an overall rating. So I know it sounds kind of confusing, but once again, we have a graphic representation that shows how you would calculate performance evaluations of individual brands across issues. So the issues could be vendor reputation, service, meets delivery dates, markup opportunity, country of origin, etc. For each of these particular brands. And then these are the weights that are assigned to each of these issues. All right, so that's all we have on Chapter 11. I know that was a little bit longer than most of our other presentations, but as you hopefully can now tell, the merchandise planning process is really extensive and really important to generating revenue and to making sure that you have products available for your customers to purchase. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, you know where to find me.